Hello, and welcome to this video where, amongst other things, you will see how focusing on creating distinct ideas in the opening sentences of your question 4s will help you with paper 1. So this student here was marked notionally between a 7 and a 9, 7 and an 8 rather, in accordance with Year 9 expected achievements. Here we can see that they wanted to use correct technical terms, and they were particularly good on their evaluation of question 4. So looking at the first question, we can see that the student has a range of points in 4 sentences. I think it's a nice point to make sure that there's a full stop and a capital letter. Perhaps many examiners would disagree with me. I think it doesn't harm. Notice that there's a range of points that are both physical and abstract. 1, the Frankenstein is scared, or that the features contrast, and others that the skin is thin. I think that's a nice touch. Again, as with before, we have the author being mentioned, language technique here immediately, focused on individual words, individual words that have been rooted with a wider quotation. And here, absolutely key, is the analysis of connotations of individual words. And look elsewhere on my website to see some demonstrations of how to analyze connotations. In literature, particularly at A-level, analysis of connotations can be a road that you can go down too far. However, I would say that for something like this English language exam at GCSE, it's amongst your most useful of tools. Notice here that we have analysis of techniques, and the analysis of connotation here of instrument actually then links to the text quite precisely. So instrument connotes conductor, and Frankenstein could be seen as the conductor or of this symphony of science and knowledge and horror and destruction. And again, nice reference to reader there at the end. The language structure, the structure question rather, then talks about repetition immediately. And as I said before, it's important in your question for the structure question to make mention of either individual techniques of internal structure or wider points of structure. And this student is going for the internal structure approach. So references repetition, nice analysis here of reflecting why he's doing this. And it's trying to say that the interest talks about disappointed Frankenstein is with himself. Again, internal structure questions, and trying to link to elsewhere in the play, the novel rather. Okay, so we're now on to question 4, which is the question on evaluation. And again, the question we must ask ourselves is, do you evaluate based on a clear variable or idea, or do you evaluate based upon a technique that's being used? And the student here evaluates based upon the techniques being used. And the analysis of the techniques is useful and precise. There's some nice embedded quotations here with lustrous and flowing, but I would say that it's more important to have a clear variable. So for example, the question I believe was about to what extent does Shelley bring the monster to life for the reader? And to understand this, I think initially we could say that the monster is brought to life because it seemed to be attractive. However, the contrast that is developed with the ugly aspects of the monster that we see in the next paragraph, demonstrate an emotional response developing in Frankenstein's narration, which makes it seem more alive and real. We have here some context and reference to language technique. Again, more context here. I would always hedge context. And by hedge, I mean avoid strong generalizations. Talk about trends. And by that I mean, whilst Victorians would certainly be more used to death, and death would be more open in a society, especially for Queen Victoria, who wore black for a substantial period of her reign after the death of her husband, death would still be a somewhat taboo subject, although less than now. The narrative style here also is first person. So omniscient means really it's somebody that knows everything about what's happening, and first person by its nature cannot necessarily be omniscient. Frankenstein does not speak about what the monster thinks and feels, but rather this recounts what was said by the monster, and presumably with some bias towards Frankenstein's perception. Notice that, therefore, the creation is called a monster. The creation does not really call himself a monster. And of interest, both the creation and Frankenstein refer to themselves as a wretch, although, of course, it is often the creation who seems to have far more self-awareness than Frankenstein.